And I will do the introduction as in TV. Hello, everybody. This is a discussion session for chapter 6 of the standards. Yeah, we are not that many today, so I don't think I should share slides or anything, but maybe we can have still like a check-in and like say, how are we? And the check-in I was having in mind was to share an experience if we had an opportunity to be the proctors, like to be proctoring a test, like taking the test and administering the test. And if not, then share an experience in which we were the test takers. Some, I don't know, like unusual situation there. So maybe we can do like a quick check-in and then discuss about the chapter and have like a shorter version of the session today. What do you think?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Okay. So how are we?
Good, mostly. It's Friday afternoon. There's nothing to complain.
Yeah, it's very cold here today. I don't like it. It's not actually that cold, but the wind stream is making it feel colder, like I think 20 below at what it is actually. So
Did you have any chance to be a proctor or like being in that position, like administering a test?
I wouldn't say I've had like much experience administering the test like in a very professional scenario. Like I've done proctoring, you know, as a TA. I just did it yesterday as well for a student who had to do a makeup exam. But like taking a test, I think the GRE was a huge experience because I am assuming it would be similar in the US and that's how they set it up in India. So in India, like whenever I took tests in university, it wasn't like that. I mean, there was proctoring, but it wasn't that regulated. But when I took the GRE, you have to go through every section, you know, for security check. They're going to check if all your documentation is okay. They're going to check if you have any chits, papers. It's very thorough. And they try to ensure that there's no noise from the outside. We have only like a few centers, like specified proctoring centers. So that was interesting. That was also maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you about that, but I was the most surprised when they gave us the liability agreement form, like for taking the responsibility that they could do anything basically with your data. And if they find something unusual, they can just invalidate your score and stuff. It was really striking to me when I read that, and I had to sign it because there was no other way.
It's true that all those agreements at the beginning can be intimidating at some point. And
oh yeah, I mean, it kind of affects your mood to take the exam too. So.
Yeah. I think when I had to do the GRE and the TOEFL, and definitely, and I did those in the US because for some reason I was in the US before, and I'm not sure if in Chile they do the same, but definitely it was interesting, the whole experience of the kind of professional proctoring, if you want, like going to one special place and having like the cubicles, the computer, and having like I don't know, like all the performance of like the test security. Yeah, that was definitely new for me. Actually, that was the first time also that I had like a computer-based test, because in Chile we have some tests but are all paper and pencil. And the test for college admission, for example, it has some like structure, and you need to like, I don't know, put your backpack in the front of the room and things like that, but it's still paper and pencil. The computer also had some extra, I don't know, professionalism, different thing. And yeah, once actually I was a proctor. Before coming here, I worked in an agency in Chile that designs the test used for college admission. And while I was working there, I was assigned to proctor a person. How do you say that in English? Non-vident person that couldn't see, blind person. Don't remember the exact name, but yeah, someone that that couldn't see, that was had that type of disability. And the interesting thing was that I had to bring like a laptop with an electronic version of the test. That was tricky because if somebody could like steal that from me, they could have like the file actually with the whole test. And I had to like be the proctor there and kind of like mark the responses, and it was very interesting also to see like how those accommodations work like in person. And yeah, I remember that was for the reading test that was in the computer, and it had some software that the person could use to read aloud the text. But then the other tests were like just ourselves reading the question to the person from the paper version. And there was a question in the science test that asked about mirrors and properties about mirrors, and if the concave mirror has some property or whatever. And it was so uncomfortable to ask the question. I wasn't sure if that was uncomfortable for him too, and it was so weird. That really, like, I don't know, it was like, then I had to like ask more questions about the person that is in charge of the accommodations, because there are some questions that in certain contexts maybe are inappropriate to just ask. So yeah, that made me feel weird. All right, so about the chapter, could you read the chapter? What do you think?
I haven't fully read it, I just skimmed it. And I was going to ask a question. Does the chapter consider the diversity equality issues in terms of like reporting the scores and all? Does it talk about it?
Like diversity, you say?
Yeah, diversity and like equity perspectives on like how to report the scores.
If I remember well, I don't think so. I mean, it should have an explanation, but I don't think it enters into any. For example,
maybe like we can talk about that a little more. I think in general, the chapter itself, initially they start off with just how fairness is important in test administration, right? So they're talking about diversity, maybe a little more in terms of people with disabilities, but there's still that discussion there. But when it comes to like reporting, what do you think like will differ like for in terms of diversity and how people understand it?
So I did some work in reporting recently with my internship at NCME lately, and they're constructing these new generation of score reports, and they're interactive. They're on the web page, and you can interact and subset scores, and you can see all these beautiful visuals or score reports, and you can hover over and see the interpretation of your scores and everything. And I wondered if that's the next phase of reporting scores more effectively and making like more meaningful, more accessible for many population. How are we gonna make sure that we consider the diversity influencing that score, new generation of the score reports, basically? Like these are interactive tools, but are they really considering aspects about some issues related to diversity? And even equity, I think, because people may not have access to those reports on the online systems or whatever, you know. So I was just curious if they ever considered that.
Yeah, that's an important point you bring up. So I know like when I took the GRE, at least there was like, they'll send you like one paper pencil version and then your scores are available online, like, you know, to forward. But I really didn't think about the other populations that maybe don't have access to internet and things. And yeah, but what would be another option if you're thinking about making those scores accessible? In terms of score reporting, from what you're saying, and with visualization and with trying to have information in a variety of ways made available online, It's just like if you have a test, then you're reporting your subtest scores, and you're probably saying how you scored in relation to the population and things like that, right? Yeah. But what would be another way if people are unable to access it? Yeah.
To me, I think maybe we should consider literacy about reading the reports. You know, they can just have this beautiful interface with lots of information to consider, right? And they can use that useful information in some ways. But if they're not literate about how they can use that tool, how is that going to be really meaningful for them and helpful for them? So maybe like there's that piece on the user part, that how literate they are to navigate through this new shiny good tool to use it most effectively.
That's cool. So then maybe have a tool which is like not overly complicated, but can also be like introduced to the user in like as few instructions as possible. Like, you know, once you go onto it, first page you would see is like just have those 10 instructions which tell you where each page will take you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the new chapter should consider this new generation of score reports and how people are going to interact with those as like from the user experience perspective and all. Maybe they can like caveat a couple of things about how to move forward and what to pay attention to more while like generating such tools.
In my own research, I'm having working in topics related with user experience and models in general on how can you understand what I call an assessment experience. And there is a concept that appears in some authors, in some models in other fields, in human-computer interface or stuff like that, that they speak about this idea that we make sense of the experience. And it's like some natural processing that we usually do about what we live. So when you see testing from that user experience perspective, you should be aware of that making sense process that happens all over the assessment experience. And in the reporting is when you see more clear that making sense, or sense making, maybe that's the right way to say. And that sense making in the reporting is when you have more chances to facilitate or to guide that sense making process. And I think the standard mentioned the idea that you, for example, need to include some cues to interpret correctly a score. But it's not just about interpretation, it's about like making sense of the whole experience that happened with you during the test. And I think that might be like an extra layer that you can include in scoring, reporting, that how do you provide information that helps the student to make sense of what happened and make sense about the result. So for example, if you have like a super good score, how do you make sense of that? Where you like better than what was expected from you or not, given your, I don't know, socioeconomical data? Or I don't know, I mean, it's tricky to even speak about this, but like what information can actually help to facilitate that making sense? And thinking also in particular with people that have lower scores, because that can be the more traumatic and the more complicated experience. And how do you, in the reporting, in the report of the score, how can you facilitate the making sense so that person is not traumatized and that person is not blocking his future learning experiences because of the results of the test? So yeah, that at least the reporting part and that aspect of the reporting in the chapter calls a lot of my attention, that at least the idea of sense making is not there, but it's kind of there indirectly.
I'm just taking notes to the English.
Okay. Another thing that caught my attention in the chapter was that they enter into the definition of standardization and about like why standardization is important and what happens when you don't have standardization, and that that's a topic that has been around. I think in the fairness chapter, we talk a little bit about that and how the concept of standardization itself is becoming a problem. In my country, at least, there is a lot of people that demonize the word standardization. I mean, in my country, like speaking about even like standard like this, it's like ugly. And I think in many other places it's becoming to grow that that rejection to the idea of standardization as has been understood. And there has been new other authors and people that are trying to kind of make it more flexible, less rigid, so it can incorporate, I don't know, like more flexibility regarding what you can present in a test. But yeah, I found interesting that it was in this section that the standardization was mentioned in more detail.
So you suggest that the standardization definition should be more flexible?
I mean, from what I read, they understand, for example, so they include two things. They include that why we can have different forms. So they speak about the idea that you can have different forms and still be standardized. And also they include the idea that you can deviate from the most radical standardization when you have a need, like in the case of people with disabilities, which is kind of like a commonplace, it's like accepted. But the thing that is not mentioned is how far away you can go in that direction. And if you can include more other type of variations that are not necessarily for making adjustment to people with disabilities, but other type of differences. I think it should be at least mention about that. But yeah, it's tricky to say like if there should be like a complete change on the idea of the standardization, how it's defined, or if it is just should be mentioned something. I don't know.
I would think you can't do away with standardization. Like, you know, that means you at least have a system in place. Otherwise, we would just be going back to what was that we did read about previously. They would just do race-based norming, right? So just within race, they just have norm scores and then standardize it that way. That's not progressive. I think if you want to move towards equity and fairness and inclusion, it would just be to make advances or make modifications to the existing system such that, you know, it has something. Otherwise you're going back to scratch and then there's no rule. It's like everybody's gonna get up and say, you know, you're not addressing my need. And I think the rules that they have for disabilities and even like within the university, we have students studying, right? So even they have certain accommodations, like if they have medical accommodations, you need to give them a certain extra time to do things. Also probably based on existing research. So I would use that as a starting point to see where those limits are drawn for different diverse subgroups, but also with the caveat that, you know, unless there's something like way off, like disabilities is like a big thing, you know, people need extra time or people need a proctor or I don't know what they call it, a script, I think scribe, right? Sometimes they need scribes to write things for them. So those are things that are extreme and those need to be mentioned, but yeah. Yeah, maybe the standards could say that, you know, appropriate research has to be looked into. I feel like they have said that somewhere.
My understanding, at least in relative to the matters of race, is that you can apply the ideas of universal design also for the imagery and the wording of the stems. So it is closer to the way that some, I don't know, particular subgroup would prefer. It's not even like they would understand better, but even like preference can be enough reason to do that. under this idea that when you are looking for something neutral, then the neutral actually accommodates to the dominating class or dominating group. And if you kind of like deviate from that, then you can make the test less rigid and then less bias against certain groups that are not the mainstream, that are not the dominant. But how exactly do you do that? That's also a question. And what's the minimum requirement if you want to do that? That maybe it should be a standard at some point. Because, for example, what I've seen in projects that I've been kind of participating, you can either change the names of the people in a math problem. You can change the images. You can change the context. But also you can go a step further and you can include like anti-racist framework and include like imagery and stuff that kind of goes against the idea of racism. And it's not just celebrating a particular culture, but also bringing a more specific message against racism. And then the question is, should you target the person? Like, should I either, there are like three options. You can ask about the race and show items that you suspect are going to be better received. You can randomly show different backgrounds or different context to each person, or you can let the student choose. So for example, let's say I have like one math problem that makes more sense for Black people. And I can like ask the race and show that item for one specific race. I can either randomize and show for some Black people white, for some Black people the Black item, and the reverse in white Black. Or I can give an option, like when you respond to the test, kind of like switching tabs and say, okay, this version of the item makes more sense for me.
Don't you think there's a lot of interaction effects there? Like there are three things, right? First thing is interaction with just technology itself, because technology is what is facilitating all this. And we're like way, way, way behind when it comes to studying just item technology interaction, okay? And then now you're bringing in another aspect called choice of like background or like, you know, just the user experience stuff in it. So I feel like that interacts with technology as well. And then that just brings me to the point of constructed relevant variants. I think that one they mentioned in the standards, and there's a lot of research to be done to get there. But I feel like that's a good idea too. You know, it's not like
it's a trade-off. We don't know how exactly trade-offs like doing that, how much you add and how much you remove. So you may include new constructed relevant variants to remove other type of irrelevant variants. Yeah. So the problem is like how much it is each, and if it pays off at the end of the switch. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Okay, I think we're on time.
Have to go. Yeah. But it's really good to see you both, and I hope to see you like next week. Okay.
Yes, nice to see you both too.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.